Now we're going to go a little bit more deeply into the blood mystery of the cycle of the menstruation and working more deeply with that bleeding cycle. If you're still in that phase, if you are not, if you've already moved through menopause into perimenopause, menopause, or post-menopause, then know that you are already holding and containing that energy. So the need to cycle into the descent within the womb changes after menopause, and you begin to hold your own energy. But if you're a woman that has never done the descent, has never done the clearing, you're still going to need to energetically go into the descent cycle and make sure that everything's reoriented into a purification. So even if you're not physically bleeding, you can do this practice, these womb clearing practices and these cyclical practices of descent just energetically. So this is the Grail cycle from bleed to bloom, and we're not so much talking about biology here, but alchemy, and it's going to map the menstrual cycle into the Grail mythos of the cycle of descent, which is when the blood releases, the containment when it's held in the womb, and then the emergence of the bloom when the light is birthed. So the descent cycle is the spiral of life, death, and resurrection within the body of a priestess. This is an alchemical process. So it's all symbolic and alchemical if you're not actually having a bleed. But if you are, the sacred bleed is the descent. So it's not to be seen as a loss, but a entering into the underworld of the self, a time of inner reflection and quiet, and a moment when the womb releases what's no longer coherent, what's no longer aligned with the higher vision that you have for your own inner architecture. And so here the Grail is emptying itself and purifying itself so that it can prepare to be filled again. So the bleed cycle is the spiral's descent, and it's the womb's way of making space for the light. The containment is the silence of the womb, the void space, the dark, still void space. After the bleed, the womb enters stillness. And this phase of containment is not about emptiness, but of potential. So the Grail is holding the seed of the next spiral, just like a seed is in the dark earth, awaiting the correct light for it to spring forth. So in this moment of breathless pause before creation, these pause points, we've been working with the pause and the breath work we're doing as well, which is the same, that potency, the potency of the stillness. And in the silence of the womb, that's where we gather strength. That's where the spiral of creation builds its potential, its momentum, just like a seed holds the blueprint of all that will come from it, but it's sitting very quietly in the dark earth waiting for the right conditions. And that's hearkening back to the timing and cycles. And so that's why all of these themes that we're spiraling around in this unit are about timing, about cycles, and these are the domain of the feminine wisdom and always have been. And so when we look at the world as it's been changed, and we've had different cycles and timing kind of hoist upon the feminine that are not in alignment with the organic structure. So we have the timing of our own birthing, which is one of the major blood mysteries, given over as a surgery, and not the woman no longer having the consciousness that she used to have when the feminine had her full powers available of choosing when to conceive, choosing when to give birth, knowing the proper cycle and inviting the masculine to enter, knowing when it was the right time. So this has always been the domain of the feminine wisdom. And as priestess, it is important for you to reclaim that within your own body and breath as a vessel. So after the descent and then the silence of that preparation, the potential of that cycle, then we move to the emergence or the bloom cycle, where the womb begins its solar cycle, where it begins to spiral outward, just like the seed begins to bloom and blossom out. And that's where light begins to build in the blood. And this is This is a real occurrence alchemically, and it's an energetic occurrence as we're building the light that we can house within our body. That light will flow through us in our blood. The old mystery said the life is in the blood. And so the moment of emergence when the grail's overflowing with new life is the priestess blooming as she becomes that flame holder. So here the spiral is made visible, and it's the grail overflowing. And once this begins to happen, then the starfire comes into the picture. And so we're going to start to talk a little bit about what this starfire is. It's the light in the blood and how we cultivate it. And we're going to be introducing an initiatory practice in a later module, assuming that you have been using your breath progressions as they were given to you, because it's very important to take them in order. And we're going to move towards a practice of building that starfire. So starfire is like the alchemical light that builds in the blood. It's more active during ovulation and also during climax, which is part of the sexual mysteries. It's really the Christos flame, alive and spiraling through the blood, through the womb. Think of it as energy. And we cultivate that starfire alchemically through the breath, which we've been doing in all of our practice, through our devotional practices, and through learning how to control and maintain our own coherence. And when I say control, I don't mean suppression in any way, shape, or face, but it's the mastery of our emotional body and mental states. This is the mastery of the advanced priestess. So at the moment the womb begins to become radiant, it's no longer really for reproduction unless you happen to have a mission like Mother Mary was holding the solar womb. And it was actually her mission to birth, to physically birth the Logos. And so some of us may hold that as to birth an enlightened child. But for many of us, it's not about physical reproduction, it's about transmission. Starfire is the light of Logos spiraling through the blood of the priestess. So on our priestess training, we need to learn about the false grail and the blood rituals circled around the illusion of power. Not all who seek the grail do so in light. And so in history, we see both in ancient and our current modern hidden history that there's many beings who have sealed themselves off from the divine light. And so they attempt to harvest it through the living blood. And this is the great, vast, unfortunate networks of satanic ritual that are still very prevalent and active on our planet. And we need to be aware. And this is really the story of the false grail, or the origin of the negative blood rituals that we see through history, where beings, it can be humans, sometimes it's animals or other beings, are used in ritual. And the ones who are performing those rituals have cut themselves off from source light, so they lose access to that spiral breath, and they lose their light. So they still know that they need to live on light, so they hunger for the power of that light, and so they turn to the blood. And they believe that by spilling the blood, they can capture the light within it. And they believe that by invoking fear and pain and sacrifice and rituals, that they can force that spiral to open to them by gaining enough power. And they believe that that grail light can be taken rather than received through devotional love and heart coherence, which is really the only way for the grail, the Holy Spirit, to descend, is in the proper frequency. So the blood rituals ultimately fail because light can't be stolen. The spiral can never be forced. There's no way for that to ever happen. It's foolproof. And the grail could never be filled with fear. The grail would simply withdraw. So when the blood's taken without the proper spiral breath, when there's distortion, when there's fragmentation, and when blood is spilled without love, it becomes a contraction. So when the blood is used to control, it becomes a curse, and that's done very intentionally by the anti-life forces. So what I want to focus on here is understanding the difference between the dark mother of the abyss of creation, which we talk about the mother of the void, which is a really important part of the origin spiral, and the dark mother of anti-life distortion. So there's two faces here. And it's important on your path as a priestess to understand the difference. So let's go back to the womb. We said the womb, we're not speaking of the womb here just as a biological organ. We're speaking of it as a vessel of memory and a chalice of creation, and ultimately as a potential portal, a portal of light transmission. And so within the anti-life side of the dark mother, not all womb energy is sacred, because the attempt to create this world and in these rituals is to densify and fragment and fill that vessel of memory with all those darker emotional states and physical pain, suffering, abuse, all of those things that fragment and keep the womb stuck in that third density memory. And so here we realize that not all darkness is fertile. There is darkness that does not produce life, that is anti-life, that is destructive. And so not all mother archetypes are life-giving. So we're exploring the difference between the true dark mother as the sacred teacher of the void and the distorted feminine archetype whose energy is siphoned into anti-life spirals. And this is really an important discernment for your training, because as we're working with blood mysteries, and we already talked about the lunar cycles and how that got hijacked in the astral plane, and how we can learn to work with the correct aspect of the lunar, but that's a very big coupling to that dark mother anti-life piece, and a confusion in a lot of feminine circles, and many women turning away from working with the moon for that reason, and they're wise to do so, but can still access the lunar current in its proper form. It's just important to understand how to do that correctly. We've already spoken about that. So the true dark mother is the guardian of the void, in the space of unknowing, of stillness. That space of gestation we spoke of with a seed is there in stillness with the potential for creation, but hasn't sprung forth into bloom. And so this is the dark mother of the womb before conception, the night before the dawn, the silence before the word is spoken. And her gifts are stillness and that containment, the holding space without interference for transformation to occur, and the discernment to know what needs to die so that new life can emerge. That is the destructive aspect of the positive dark mother. There has to be a recycling of energies that are no longer productive, and that's different than a destruction for the sake of destruction that we see in the negative dark mother archetype. And she's also about integration. She's going to help us weave the shadow, the dark side of self, into our wholeness. So the dark mother is a very important part of our learning, but we need to separate the two. So the true dark mother is the teacher of this cycle of descent into the other world, the phase of the Grail cycle where the priestess enters that underworld space of her own psyche to retrieve her lost light and to integrate everything back in the light and the dark are balanced. The anti-life spiral, in contrast, is a distortion of the feminine current, and it's not rooted in stillness, but in stagnation. It doesn't contain, like the womb contains, it constrains, and it doesn't integrate the dark and the light, it actually just fragments them. So this anti-life spiral is fueled by emotional siphoning, using the womb's energy to feed external systems rather than to increase internal coherence. It involves energetic inversion, which is reversing the flow of creation into consumption or depletion or destruction. You see a lot of reverse rituals in this space. False martyrdom is kind of an archetype that you can see here, where there's a woman that doesn't realize she's doing this self-sacrificing for others without alignment or consent, and she's just giving all of her energy. That's kind of a subtle way that someone can drift into the dark side, because all your energy is just getting siphoned and you're not actually generating any feminine current. And then, of course, we talked about astral entanglement with the lunar currents, and there's many, many realms of astral entanglement. Our whole society, unfortunately, is contrived to entangle us with and enmesh us with the astral pornography, the way media is, the images, social media, all of the levels of how we live are extractive. And so we have to make sure that we're not allowing any external forces to manipulate the heart womb's resonance, or any of our field is not being drained off. And that's why we're spending so much time sealing the field and making sure that you're aware of all these different places where your energy is inadvertently leaving you, because you're not going to be able to develop the grail when you have holes in the vessel. So in the inversion space, the traditional spiral that's building into coherence can be masked very devotionally. It can be very, like a mimic of the mother. And so you have to really learn how to discern. But the way you can tell is it's draining your energy rather than nourishing you. And the womb is used more as a battery, not as a beacon. So we are discerning here the true Dark Mother as the teacher of the void that holds the womb as a grail of transmission, not as a vessel of depletion. And we're learning to walk that path so the priestess can discern between the fertile darkness of creation, the gestational stillness, and the stagnant spiral of consumption.